If your foundation somehow always ends up looking worse than your bare skin, I hate to tell you this, but it's not the foundation. And I know that's hard to believe because so many of us have been on this endless search for the one, the perfect formula, the better finish, the new launch that's gonna be the answer to all of our problems. Fast forward, we now have a foundation collection that all individually promise perfect skin, but somehow still doesn't look quite right on our skin. It's not the foundation, it's the application. So let me show you how it's done. The first thing we need to talk about is skin prep, but I wanna go a little deeper than how I normally explain it. Normally, I just tell you guys to prep your skin with hydrating products, and I think a lot of people are assuming that to do that well, they need to add loads and loads of hydration by piling on skincare. Many, many, many layers of skincare. And that's not actually what we want to do. What we're really trying to do in this step is to create a surface that feels balanced, because if foundation is sitting on a surface that's too dry, it's going to grab and look heavy. But if it's too wet, it's gonna slip and slide and separate. And then if there are too many layers that aren't really compatible with one another, it's just gonna pill. And this is where I really think that a lot of people go wrong. So instead of thinking, I need more hydration, I want you to start thinking, what does my skin actually feel like right before I apply my foundation? Does it feel balanced? When it comes to skin prep, I like to adjust it depending on the person that I'm working on. So let's take my face as an example. On my cheeks, my skin is pretty normal. I have small pores, not too much oil production. So I'll go in with a more hydrating, thicker moisturizer in that area. But on my nose, my forehead, and my chin, my skin tends to get a lot oilier. So I'll use something much lighter there, like a gel-based moisturizer that still gives me the hydration that I need, but without adding too much slip. After moisturizer comes sunscreen, and that is, of course, applied everywhere. If you're using a chemical sunscreen, it's really important to wait for like 10 to 15 minutes for it to fully dry down and activate before applying anything on top of it. You'll get a better result if you let the sunscreen just dry down and do its thing. If you're using a mineral sunscreen or a physical sunscreen, you can apply products on top of it right away. Then after that, I target my more problematic zones. So for me, I have larger pores through the mid-face, so I like to go in with a pore-filling primer just in that area. If I use a pore-filling primer on my entire face, it can start to look a little too dry and too flat on the cheeks. So that's why it's really important to treat by zone. Primers can actually be really helpful, but I think they're also often very misunderstood. Primers are not a replacement for skin prep, and I see a lot of people using it this way. Honestly, they're not even always necessary. I hardly ever use them. But if you have a very specific concern, they can be an extra helpful step. So if you struggle with things like redness, for example, you can use something like this. Excessive dryness, something like this. Too much oil, something like this. Larger pores, very common complaint, something like this. You get the point. What I don't want you to do though is treat primer like something that you automatically need to use everywhere. It works best when you use it intentionally, only where it's actually solving a problem, if you even have a problem to solve. Use primers strategically. Don't just assume you need one, because you might not. They're not as necessary as I think the general public think. There aren't that many makeup artists that depend on it. That's all I gotta say about that. So just to summarize all of that, the face should feel hydrated and plump, but not too wet. You should have sunscreen on everywhere, and then primer should be used in the zones where they're needed to target specific concerns. If you're finding any of this helpful, then don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and to subscribe. Now, before we move on, I also want to quickly mention something, because I've noticed that a lot of you have been commenting lately on how much better my skin has been looking. And I want to share something that I've been doing that feels a little more holistic, because what we put on our skin matters, of course, but I do think that there's something to be said for supporting the skin from within too. And that's where today's sponsor, Ritual, comes in. This is called Hyacera, and it is a supplement that I take once a day to help improve skin smoothness and to reduce fine lines and wrinkles. I have noticed such a difference in how glowy my skin looks after I started taking this. I also feel like all the little fine lines around my eyes have subtly improved too, which is awesome, because you guys know that's such an area of concern for me. It's the thing that makes me the most self-conscious. Something else that I really love about this brand, other than the fact that I have noticed results, is that it's made traceable. So you can actually see the form, suppliers, and studies behind its key ingredients. It's very transparent, which I really value, because you know exactly what you're putting in your body, and It's easy to take. It's 1 capsule a day. You can take it with food or without, which I always really appreciate. It's very, very easy to add into your routine. Something else that I've really struggled with in my life is sleep. Oh my gosh, sleep, so brutal. So I started taking their melatonin too, and I've actually noticed a big difference there as well. The Bio Series melatonin is a 3-in-1 tablet in a capsule, and it combines instant and extended release melatonin to support not only falling asleep, but also staying asleep so that you actually wake up rested. This really is such a great company. So if you want to check them out, I'll leave a link for you in my description box, along with my code for 25% off your first order. And if you're watching this on your TV, you can also just scan the QR code on the screen right here. The next thing we need to talk about is formula. A skin tint is not going to look or perform in the same way as a full coverage foundation, and a very glowy, radiant formula is not going to wear or sit on the skin in the same way as something that's more matte or long wearing. That doesn't mean that one is better than the other. Okay, it just means that they need to be approached a little differently when it comes to application. So before you even apply your foundation, it really helps to ask yourself, what kind of result is this formula actually designed to give me? Because if you understand what it's designed to do, it becomes a lot easier to make it work for you. And the same thing goes for finish. If I'm using something matte, I know that I need to be really careful that the skin underneath is balanced, not too dry, because matte formulas can grab very quickly. If I'm using something more radiant or glowy, I know that I need to be a little more mindful of where I place it and how much slip I already have underneath from my skincare, because those formulas can move around a lot more easily. So this is really less about finding the perfect foundation and more about understanding what the foundation you already have is trying to do. Because once you understand that, you can adjust your technique to make almost anything work. And I actually want to show you this in real time, because I think it's really easy for me to say that almost any foundation can work and look like your skin, but it's better if I actually visually prove it. So on one side of my face, I'm going to use a lighter coverage skin tint. This one is the L'Oreal Lumi Le Glow tint. And then on the other side, I'm going to use a full coverage foundation. This one is the Estee Lauder Double Wear. And the point here is not to compare them and decide which one looks better. It's just to show you that even though these are two very different formulas, polar opposite formulas, both of them can still look beautiful and skin-like when they are applied properly. So let's start with the skin tint side first. For a skin tint or anything with a lower viscosity, I personally like to apply it to the back of my hand first and then go in with a foundation brush. And what I'll do is coat the brush evenly with the product and then start buffing it into the skin. Because when you buff it in like this, it gives you a really thin, even layer all over. And that really is the goal in the beginning. It's not coverage. What you want to do is just get an even wash. We can always go back in and we can build it later if we need to, but we want to lay down a smooth skin-like base first. Because this formula is watery, buffing it is going to be the best way to diffuse it evenly, and you can see that here. Now on the fuller coverage side, I actually like to apply it a little differently. With something like Estee Lauder Double Wear, I personally prefer using more of a dot method and then blending it in with a damp beauty blender. So I'll dot the foundation only onto the areas of the face where I know I want more coverage first, and then I'll press it in with my sponge. To prep your sponge for this, you want to fully open and close it in water and then wring it out really well. It should feel damp, but it should not feel soaked. You can tell that it's ready to use when it's about doubled its size and it feels really soft to the touch. One of the reasons I really like a beauty blender for full coverage formulas is because it naturally picks up some of that excess product. So even though I'm working with a more full coverage foundation, the application actually ends up looking a lot more sheer and skin-like than it would if I were using a brush. One thing I would not recommend doing on either side, skin tint or full coverage, even though I have absolutely lazily done this in many of my videos before, and I fully own that, okay? Before you start writing in the comments, I own it. I own it. What I don't want you to do is apply foundation directly onto the skin from the applicator and then try to blend it out. You will not get the best result from that because most of the time you end up applying way more product than you actually need. It's also not very hygienic. So once you've got that initial layer on, this is where a lot of people can go wrong again, because the instinct can be to just go in with more foundation everywhere to build more coverage, but that's usually what takes you from something that looks very natural and skin-like to something that starts looking a lot more like makeup. So instead of adding another full layer all over the face, I want you to start thinking a little bit more strategically. So only build coverage in the areas that actually need it. So let's go back to the skin tint side first. With skin tints, you can build them using a thin layer method by doing the exact same thing you did in the initial application, just with another very light layer on top. So again, back of the hand, evenly distribute it through the bristles, and then buff it into the skin. You're basically building it like little thin coats of nail polish, and that's what keeps it looking smooth and skin-like instead of looking really heavy. But I will say this, you also have to be realistic about what the product is meant to do. A skin tint has a certain texture and finish for a reason, right? So if you're finding yourself doing layer after layer after layer, trying to get it to look like a fuller coverage formula, girl, you probably just need a fuller coverage formula in the finish that you like best, whether that's a natural finish, a matte finish, or a glowy finish. With that said though, a couple of layers of skin tint is totally fine, especially with buildable formulas like this one. But if you're never happy with it, you probably just need something that's fuller coverage. Speaking of fuller coverage, now on the fuller coverage side, I would do the same thing, but just in a more targeted way. So I'm gonna look at the areas that are a little more problematic, add a little more pigment there with that dot method, and then press it in to build. If you wanna keep more coverage in an area, press the sponge in. If you wanna soften or shear out the edges, you can sweep. Okay, so pressing is gonna give you more density and more coverage. Sweeping is what helps you diffuse everything so it still looks natural. That little difference in movement in your hands actually makes a really big difference in how the foundation ends up looking. Now, once I've got my foundation where I want it, this is where I like to go in and do what I call micro editing with concealer. This step is really important because foundation is not meant to do everything. Its job is really just to broadly even things out. Concealer is what corrects targeted problem areas. If I'm trying to cover something like a blemish or a dark spot, I'll usually reach for a pot concealer. Pot concealers have more density, so they're better for those little targeted areas where you really want that coverage to stay put. But under the eyes, I would not use that because it is way too dense. I did it here so that you can see how heavy and terrible it looks. This area moves more, it creases more, it needs more flexibility. And the denser a formula is, the less flexible it tends to be. So the more likely it is to crease. So for me, it's pot concealer on the face where I need more coverage and liquid concealer under the eyes. And here's another thing that makes a huge difference. Concealers cover better, they blend better, and they honestly even crease less when you let them sit for a little bit before blending them out. If you apply concealer and blend it immediately, it's still very wet. So a lot of the time you're just kind of moving it around the face instead of actually getting the coverage from it. But if you let it dry down for a second, like 1 minute-ish, it gets a little bit tackier and it's a lot more concentrated, and it will cover better and just look a lot better. If you haven't tried that, try it. You'll be shocked at the difference, like shocked. Now, when it comes to very blue or purple under eyes, this is where things can get a little bit more specific. If you go straight in with a light concealer, a lot of the time, all you're really doing is turning a blue or purple under eye into an under eye that is gray. And that's why sometimes when you do your concealer, your under eyes don't look quite right, even though technically they are lighter. So there are really two ways that you can approach this. The first is to go in with a corrector and then brighten with concealer on top, and that absolutely works. I've shown that method a lot on my channel. But the other way that you can do it is to first go in with a concealer that's almost an identical shade to your actual skin tone and pulls a little bit peachier. That first layer will help neutralize that blue or purple tone without making the under eye look too light too quickly. It basically matches the purple tone to your skin tone. And then once that's matched, you can go in with a brightening concealer that's maybe 1 or 2 shades lighter if you still want that very lifted, brightened effect. Because I have a lot of fine lines around my eyes, I have to be very careful with this or it can accentuate my lines a lot. So I apply it only really where there is depth, in the hollows and not around the entire orbital area. So in summary, to keep the overall complexion looking lighter, fresher, and more natural, use very light layers and then micro edit with concealer. Skin tints go on better with a brush. Full coverage goes on better with a sponge. Here are both sides finished in studio lighting. Full coverage side, skin tint side. You can hardly even tell a difference, right? And here it is in natural lighting. Again, full coverage side, skin tint side. I also want to show you something very quickly up close. When you get this close to the skin, yes, you are going to see product. And this is something I see people get really caught up in, but it's just not realistic. If you have makeup on, guys, it's gonna look like you have makeup on when you are looking at yourself like this. But when you step back, which is how people actually see you in real life, they're not all up in your face, the skin looks really smooth and really, really beautiful. So if you ever find yourself obsessing over how your makeup looks, you know, when you are this close up, you might just need to take a step back and look at it from a more realistic perspective. Because at the end of the day, the goal shouldn't be perfection. You're already perfect. We're just trying to even things out a little. Thank you for watching. Here are 2 other videos that I think you might find helpful, because this one's over.